Hi, welcome to another episode of the TC4RE Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alex, and for this episode, I'm joined by my co-host, Jeramie. In this episode, we have our second view on how to prepare for an ethically underrepresented workforce and the impacts of a culturally aware leader. Our special guest for this podcast is Colin, a chief technologist at Computacentre with over 20 years experience in the IT industry. I entered this episode not sure what to expect, but Colin's experience and industry knowledge left me in deep thought and in awe of his success. This is an episode that you will want to listen to again. So wherever you are, grab a notebook and a pen and enjoy the TC4RE Podcast. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the TC4RE Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Alex, and I am joined by Jel on this episode. Hi, Jel.
Hi there,
how are we
Alex.
doing?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Good.
Really good. And really excited for this episode. We have someone who's really senior within Computacentre and is going to be able to share a lot of insight and knowledge on today's topic. So introducing himself, Colin. Hi, Colin. How are you?
Good morning. Colin Williams, Business Line CTO for Computacentre UK. It's great to be here.
Yes, and brilliant to have you on the podcast, Colin. So today we're focusing on the topic of how to prepare for an ethically underrepresented workforce and the impacts that culturally aware leaders need to take. So, Colin, I'm keen to know about the setup at Computacentre regarding its workforce and how it's tried to develop over the years and over time.
Okay, sounds good. So most of my commentary will be about Computacentre UK because I work in the UK organisation,
Great.
even though Computacentre is a global organisation with substantial presence in Germany and the USA and around mainland Europe. But in the UK, we've been on our own journey. The UK country unit is one of the largest elements in Computacentre. It is a diverse workforce, but we've got work to do, like many organisations. We are a service and solutions provider, so assume that we're a big IT player in the IT space, from a reselling point of view, from a service delivery point of view, and managed services, which means a lot of our workforce is either engineering, technical, sales individuals, front of house, selling to customers, or some form of services or customer services person that's part of the keeping the machine running. And so we've got a mix of individuals that underpin Computacentre. And so we decided to go on our own journey. If I'm honest, we've been on this journey a while. So we originally started this diversity and inclusion journey a good few years ago, underpinned by hiring a D&I leader. So that's my first tip to everybody. If you're going to do this, get a point person. It gets really, really hard to do this if you haven't got somebody who's on point as D&I manager, D&I lead, because that person will get out of bed every day and live the story.
Yeah.
So as soon as we did that, we actually got some focus, and we kicked off with gender initially. And so we put together programs to advance women through Computacentre because they were an underrepresented group at senior levels. That program worked really, really well, and it's now a enduring, sustainable program in Computacentre.
And Colin, what does that mean? It's worked really well. I mean, what's some of the tangible impacts you've had on that gender diversity strand?
Good question. So the first thing is it's a topic that's visible, right? So prior to doing it, the topic of underrepresentation in the female workforce at senior leadership levels, and dare I say it, not even senior leadership levels, but just with an aspiration to further a career with real purpose, that probably didn't have the same level of resonance that it has now. So now a woman in Computacentre absolutely knows that there are no obstacles to a senior position based on capability, and there's no barriers or hidden barriers in relation to gender stereotypes. Now, I can't say they were previously, but you don't know about these things unless you put an initiative around.
Yeah.
And the value of it now is we've seen a significant amount of females in senior leadership roles that arguably may not have been there without a programmatic activity to develop their skills, develop confidence, make them visible as potential candidates for future roles. And then when the roles come along, make sure they have the right coaching and techniques to make sure they secure the role. It's pointless just going for the role and almost believing that you're not going to get the role as soon as you sit down. So all of that work was a development program. It was almost like a programmatic way of coaching, mentoring, skills acquisition, to signpost a number of leaders for the future, nominated either by themselves or by their line managers to go on a program with mentors, with additional coaching. And that's proved to be a very, very beneficial program in Computacentre.
Great. So basically, we're putting some additional focus on there, forcing it from leadership, making it into something that's programmatic and trackable. Actually, that's helped us get results when it comes to gender diversity, gender progression within CC, which is amazing. So well done. You mentioned earlier, actually, we might be a player in the IT industry. I think anybody listening to this who comes from the IT industry knows quite how big Computacentre is. So no need to undersell yourself, I would say. But
significant.
Yeah. But I guess you proved the concepts there when it comes to gender, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
How's that then evolved into what we're looking at from a race perspective?
Good question. Ethnicity might not have been next on the list. We didn't really have a formal list to say, in relation to inclusion and diversity, we're going to slowly tick off a number of minority groups. But sadly, the situation that we all talk an awful lot about in 2020 forced us to have a bit of a wake-up call. So around the time of the George Floyd sad murder, we had an internal conversation to say, what do we do as Computacentre? Do we make an external statement, or do we actually make a internal change that's going to have enduring and lasting impact in Computacentre and the broader industry? So we chose the latter, right? It would have been easy to pop out a paragraph on the website to say it's really, really terrible to see these atrocities across the world. But no, we put together our first EIG, so Employee Impact Group. I think they're also called Employee Resource Groups. And we'd never done it before. So we learned on the job. And with the support of our CEO, MD, head of D&I, our chief people officer, and I'm going to come back to that, because without that sort of support, these things just don't work.
Yeah.
But we had full support to do whatever was required to put together a program to ensure that ethnic minority individuals in Computacentre were better represented, had a voice, had a similar level of additional development coaching and mentoring aligned to the same program that we had in gender, and also to make sure Computacentre outside showed up differently. For an outsider looking into Computacentre, a very traditional IT employer, 40 years in the industry. So let's say the demographic is representative of an IT reseller with that level of time.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure the external persona of Computacentre was representative of this new Computacentre that we wanted to radiate to all. So the EIG was kicked off with a number of like-minded individuals.
And was that your first step, Colin? After
it was our
the
first,
conversation.
It was our first true EIG.
Really interesting, Colin, because we're going to be talking about ERGs at some point in the future. And actually, we've spoken about it could be, how you get them up and running, how you get kind of mind share and everything else. And for that to be your first step, I'd say that's quite a big one. I don't know what you think, Alex, but they are kind of getting these going can be quite tricky. So it's quite interesting that that's the first place that you went. I guess from a programmatic standpoint, I don't know, is that how you?
I'm glad you called out to all that it's hard, because it's hard.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with internal and external people. We've got a number of them now. That was the first main one, but we've got a number of them now in other areas. But to anybody listening to this podcast, putting together an EIG is not easy. It requires senior leadership support, whether that's financial, whether that's additional guidance, whether that's just support. In other words, we're going to give you the empowered position to make things happen. Without that, it's hard, and it takes a lot of time. When you're forming any new team, and you've got the dynamics of a team, and you've got the fact that you're doing it as a extracurricular volunteering activity aligned to your normal day job, it's hard to get off the ground. But the rewards of doing it outweigh the time you put in, and sometimes the sleepless nights that you've got when you put in so much work. Because if you do it right, and if you have an organization that's not doing it for a tick box and is doing it to drive long-term enduring change, you'll see the impact of it. You'll hear the impact of it. You'll see people leaning into it to be part of it. And the employees who might have been oblivious to these things happening, all of a sudden can see something tangible happening in the organization that they can tap into or buy into. And that's the experience that we've had. But under no illusion, it's not easy to kick off.
Yeah.
So I'd like to get into the nitty gritty of the beginning aspect of the ERG, because what I would expect is that you've now got this set of people who all agree to follow the same cause, but are not quite sure how to do it.
Yeah.
And from my understanding of what an ERG is, this is not their day job. They're going above and beyond what they're doing. If I'm a business and I'm in that position right now, what are the things that they should implement from the get-go to say, okay, this is how you're going to be able to be efficient in the long term?
That's an absolutely wonderful question, and there's no perfect answer. Sorry to give you the bad news on that one. If you have a D&I specialist, it helps. We were fortunate that we'd recruited a D&I lead, because that person has domain experience, domain understanding of the topic. The rest of us didn't really have an understanding of the topic. And they also benefit from having an understanding of the structure or the fabric required to put together something like that. Do they have all the answers? Of course they don't. But at least they give you some of the foundations. But your point is well made. All of us, D&I lead included, were learning. The key thing is that there are fundamentals of building teams, and they exist regardless of the team that you're building, whether it's a football team or an EIG. The key thing is to make sure you select the right people. I can't stress that enough. If you select the wrong people, it's going to fail. If you select the right people, and by the right people, I mean they have to truly believe in the cause. They have to be truly emotionally invested in the cause, and it can't be for any personal gain. This is a real altruistic activity. They're doing it for the greater good. They're doing it for something that hopefully will surpass their existence in the organisation. So whatever you do, make sure you select somebody who absolutely is in it for all the right reasons, because to your point, they're going to have to go above and beyond their normal day job to make it happen. And there's no additional time that you can apply. You just got to factor into your day job. In addition to that, let's say rigor helps. One thing that we did quite early is that we actually put down some real foundations and some frameworks and structure. How are we going to meet? How often do we meet? When we meet, what do we do? How do we track activities? What does good look like as an outcome? How can we put together a number of domains, each with a lead, and the lead is responsible for making sure that domain happens? So, for example, the education domain, the external impact domain, the speak freely domain. In other words, how do we make sure people have an internal voice? Recruitment, all those domains, and you can choose your own domain. There's no exact science that says the right domains to have in your EIG, but the key thing is give everybody, nominate a number of leads. So we actually nominated almost like a steering group. That was the main group. Each member of the steering group had one of those major domains. They then secured an awful lot of like-minded volunteers, equally volunteering above and beyond, again, with the same investment in the cause, not a tick box. So when you do that, and that means everybody is involved for the right reasons. No one's actually looking for any external validation of their activity. They're doing it because it should be done. They're doing it because they actually believe it's the right thing for the organisation. Then your EIG will work for all the right reasons. And that's, I can't stress that enough. There's no magic wand. There's no secret science.
And it sounds like with that rigor, that commitment, people who are passionate, you've had 2 years to go through the growing pains, getting it right. And what does that look like 2 years on? What are some of the successes that you've had?
Yeah, we've had a lot of good successes. So we've done, one of the most significant things we did was one of those quadrants was called Speak Freely. Because one of the biggest challenges that any organisation has with any sensitive topic, race, disability, LGBTQ+, all those topics that people just don't want to talk about, they are challenging to discuss. So Speak Freely was our way to say, it's safe to talk here. And we'll create safe spaces for you to talk or to listen and learn, or to speak without any prejudice or to speak without any fear of reprisal. One of the most common things that we hear, and it's often from leaders, is I don't know what to say. I'm too scared to say the wrong thing, so I better just say nothing at all. And we wanted to go the opposite way. We wanted everyone to talk. We wanted it to no longer be a taboo subject. So the Speak Freely team did an awful lot of work around regular, almost open mic type sessions where everybody, regardless of seniority, regardless of role, could jump onto a call and know that all topics were on the table. Nothing was off the table. and there was at no point would anyone judge you because you were clumsy in your wording.
Yeah.
So
it's quite a
that's
nice
an
way to
example
describe
of
it, actually, because it is that you're tripping over yourself sometimes, aren't you?
Yeah,
We see our allies
yeah,
really trying hard, but you're building
yes,
the muscle, aren't you, around what
yeah,
to say, how to say it, how to be sensitive. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a
And
really good way
that
to
was
describe
fantastic.
it.
That's fantastic. We're very proud of that because it's something that has been enduring through the last couple of years. We also did a different type of version of that about a couple of weeks ago, where we actually had a number of rooms in our offices, and somebody could come into that room, and there were people from the IG in that room, and they could ask any topic about anything. And so we actually had people who previously been too scared to broach certain topics, but because they knew it was safe to walk in and effectively just ask that taboo thing. And so again, we had, the additional openness that we've got in this topic has been rewarding.
Brilliant.
We did a big program on allyship, because allyship's a very important thing. And so we did one-to-one and one-to-many allyship broadcasts, A, to make people aware of the topic, B, to make them aware that they've probably been an ally and didn't realise, and C, to make more people lean forward and realise that allyship is something that we can all do and we can all benefit from.
Yeah.
And training. We made a point of ensuring that there was some formal training, especially to our senior leaders. So we actually went through a 5-module training program for our senior leadership team, sponsored by our country MD. And that was around things like unconscious bias, microaggressions, inclusion and belonging. How do you recruit in the right way?
And has that
All
filled
the
out
things
to the rest of the organisation, some of that training around?
So it's available to the broader organisation, but crazily, we did the pilot with the most senior people in the country unit, because we almost wanted to make sure if they went through the program, and more importantly, they absorbed the teachings of the program, they'll cascade it via their own behaviour. So that's the reason why they were the first cohort. And now we've actually changed the program around a little bit, learned from it, as you always do with these programs, and we're going to make it available in different form, slightly easier to consume to a broader audience.
Okay. But look, I mean, that all sounds great, and I think we know how important leadership is in, if they say it's important culturally, that can start to make a difference, and actually, as you say, it permeates through the business, which is what we need for real change. I guess changing stack ever so slightly, Colin. I mean, it'd be great to understand your role in all of this, and maybe just a little bit more about you and your history at CC, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you've been there 1 or 2 years, right? You can tell us if it's slightly different.
Yeah, a couple. So I'm probably 30 years in the IT industry, which is a scary number. So I've seen I'd say I've seen the bad and the good, and a few more bits of bad, and now the better. Because the original IT industry wasn't really ethnically diverse. So whether that's ethnic minorities, whether that's females, it wasn't at all. So I do remember in the early days, probably being the only person who looked like me in very, very large IT forums or IT gatherings. And it was noticeable. It really was. And it was noticeable, I'm guessing, for the first decade and a half of my employ. It's improved significantly in the last decade, but it's still nowhere near perfect. If you look at somebody, ethnic minority, whether it's female or whether it's ethnic, Black, or other minority groups in senior leadership roles in IT organisations, thin on the ground. So I've been through numerous roles. It's a mixture. So I've been involved in some sales leadership roles, but most of my roles have always been leading technical practices. So right now I'm a CTO in Computacentre, but I've always either built or led technical teams. So I've seen the workforce in its best form. I used to go out of my way to recruit women into teams because I'm a dad of 2 daughters, I'm a brother of 2 sisters. So I've always championed the cause that a woman shouldn't see obstacles in front of her based on gender. You should be judged based on your capability and your output and your value. It shouldn't be your packaging that determines whether or not you're the right citizen for somebody. Yeah. So I've always built teams and almost gone out of my way, probably from a positive discrimination point of view, to ensure there were women represented in the team. crazily, and it sounds mad to say it, I probably didn't do that from a ethnic minority point of view. I didn't go out of my way to positively, benefit or encourage ethnic representation. I didn't do that. I did it for women, but I didn't do it for ethnic minorities in the broader sense. And thinking about it now, I don't know why I didn't. I think probably at the time, even for somebody who's been around as long as me, even at that time, I was probably semi-conditioned to that being the norm. Right, the norm for me was how it was, and I probably didn't believe I was empowered to do anything about it.
Wow.
And crazily, this is probably the first time I'm even reflecting on this right now, because I didn't actually. I've recruited the right person based on capability, and I've always done that. When some of my best hires were people that actually didn't have IT expertise, but they had the right emotional characteristics, the right aptitude, the right behavioural characteristics, and so I knew they had the right fabric to be the best person for the role.
Yeah.
The fact they didn't come from IT, so I always recruited that way. But I did actually go out my way to say, if there was a female candidate in the pool, I would make a point of encouraging them to put themselves forward. They would still have to get the role on merit, but I would encourage them to put themselves forward, and I might have actually put in the work beforehand to work with them to make sure they believed they were ready and equipped to apply for the role. I didn't do that for other minority groups, maybe, as I say, because I didn't realise that's probably what I should have done.
Do you think, and that's great insight, thank you for being so honest, but I wanted to ask, do you think it's because there just wasn't people from that background really applying for those jobs? Do you think it's because it was a small percentage? Because when I hear you say that, and I can hear you feel sort of bad for not doing that, I guess there's always another side to it, right? I mean, how many people did you really interview that were from your background? From memory, I'm sure you could probably count it to be less than one hand, or maybe two.
I think you're spot on. I touched on earlier on that I was one of few back then. And so there was almost none who come through the door recruiting. So I suppose that saves me a bit. But then again, I've always mentored and coached people. So I don't really care what colour, creed, gender, orientation you are. If you're somebody who wants to be the best version of you, then we'll work together and we'll make that happen. But I think you've called it way back when. There just weren't enough minority group individuals. There were no gay individuals, really.
Yeah.
There were few females. Yeah, true. The hidden figures, right? Yeah. There were few people who would highlight their disability, hidden disabilities, dyslexia, autism. There were few people. No one would highlight those things. This whole topic of D&I was a taboo topic. Yeah. No one discussed this. That's the biggest thing. So I think you're spot on. There were the inbound stream of people who looked like me wasn't really there. Even though I knew externally, people did actually say to me, "We're happy that you're doing what you're doing, and we're happy that you're there because you're one of us and you're there." It's back to that you can't be, you can't see.
Exactly.
And people have said that for years.
I think, and your honesty is incredible. I think it's really enlightening, and also fascinating in that, you can talk so eloquently around gender and all the deliberate and the positive discrimination that went on to improve that within our industry. And actually, it's only now, you've been in the industry 3 decades.
A long time.
But it's only now they're actually talking about the same kind of deliberate action when it comes to race, disability, and all of the other groups that aren't represented in our industry. Yeah. And it just goes to show, I think, that the change needs to happen, because you used a great phrase, which was, maybe I was conditioned, not even myself, right, as being part of the community and knowing that I was a role model. And it just shows just how hard it is, right? I mean, change doesn't come overnight, and we've seen. I think gender is a good example of how, as an industry, we know when we put the effort in, the focus in, not as an individual but as an industry, you can make a difference. And I think ethnicity, I'm really hoping that, give it however long it might take, when there's systemic challenges, it's not going to happen in 2 months, is it? But in years to come, we'll be having the same conversation around, I remember when, I would talk about gender and not ethnicity.
So I think it'd be better. I still don't think it'd be seismic, because society still has issues, right? And this is purely a representation of society. Now, society is also acknowledging that something needs to change. And in reality, it's the generations that are coming now that are deciding that.
Yeah.
if you go to a school, my daughter's told me many a time that some of the behaviour that was the norm in my school is not tolerated. You can't bully somebody because of their orientation, or the school will turn on you. That was the opposite in my day. In my day, that person who was different was the person who was bullied. So I think the generations that are coming next will not stand for a society that's not inclusive.
Yeah.
And a society doesn't allow someone to be the best version of their individualized self, the best version of their authentic, true self. And I think that's helping the current generation and the generations behind to wake up and go, okay, maybe we've got something to learn from those younger individuals who are educating us that our way may not have been the right way.
Yeah.
So I don't think it will be a quick change, but I think it will be a change because future generations won't accept it. And maybe this generation at least is starting the change and they can benefit from it as well.
We hope so.
So I wanted to ask about, actually, let me frame this differently, right? Let's go back in time to the first day that you started within the industry. If you could give a message to that person for them to be able to succeed and get to the position that you're in now, what would you say to them? What do you think would be the key aspects that they would need to take?
Apart from make sure your pension's good and buy a house.
Very practical advice. I like it.
Yeah. I think that the advice is different because the time is different. Way back then, that person was trying to survive. Wow. Now, that person will be trying to thrive. That's the difference. That's a massive difference. I'd expect that individual today to believe that they have value to add to the organisation, and the organisation is almost lucky to have them walk through a door because the potential they have is going to be immense. So the organisation gets value. So they almost walk in thinking, you know what? I've chosen you as much as you selected me. You're the lucky ones.
Yeah.
Way back then, it was all about survival. How can I make sure that I work 10 times harder than the people next to me who don't look like me, just to make sure that I can be seemed to belong? I wasn't really belonging. I was just making sure that my work output was so significant, no one could fire me or no one could find a reason why that different person isn't doing the job. And you'll often find that when you speak to people of my generation, that's why they ended up working so extraordinarily hard just to stand still.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm talking about extraordinary amounts of work just to stand still. It wasn't all of that work was going to be contributory to your advancement through the organisation based on merit or based on value or contribution. No, it wasn't that. You were working extraordinarily hard just to remain level. That person now, no. I'd expect to walk in and say, person who's recruited me, I'm actually targeting your job. And the person above you, I'm targeting their job as well. And I absolutely have a belief that regardless of how I look, if I work hard enough, if I absorb the right teachings and if I radiate the right persona, I should be there as well. Way back then, in my head, at no point did I believe that I could get to a senior role on merit. At no point did I believe that.
Yeah, and and I think what you're touching on there is really that that covering around our identity, a little bit, of imposter syndrome, thinking that we've absolutely got to be better than perfect, to use a phrase, almost whiter than white, right, as it were, almost to be on a par with our peers. And it's something actually that we will touch on in another podcast as we move forward, because it's such an important topic. Sadly, I won't ask you now, Colin. I'm sure you've got loads of views on it, but time-wise, it maybe won't work. But look, I guess just to bring it back before we finish, you've given us such a lovely overview of what, first of all, yourself and your experiences, so thank you. But also, of course, the journey that Computacentre have been on over the past couple of years and previous years around D&I. I guess what, we as listeners and me and Alex would love to hear is just about what does the future look like? What plans have you got for the coming couple of years or few years that you really want to see make a difference when it comes to race?
Yeah, so the good news, a lot of the stuff that we're doing, and we almost had a little pact as in the IG, and our pact was our activities have to be enduring, and we're actually building a program of activity and we're driving change that's going to outlast all of our current employment in Computacentre. So we were building something not for now, we're building it for next and beyond. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing a lot of the stuff that we have put together cascading across the group. And we absolutely hope anyone who sees anything that's good steals with pride, because a better Computacentre in this topic everywhere is the best Computacentre it can be. As you all know, Computacentre is part of TCare, which, full disclosure, 5 years ago, I would have been surprised if Computacentre had been part of a group like that. Not for any negative reasons, it's just because the topic wasn't a priority topic in the agenda. Culturally, it still would have been something we believed in, but from an activity point of view, in other words, somebody stepping forward and getting involved, maybe we probably didn't have the structure or the vehicle or the human capital to do it. But now we're not only happy to be a part of TCare with colleagues like yourselves, we'd like to be a passionate part of TCare because we'd like to see the change that we are driving in Computacentre become the same change and become the norm in the IT community. Because if one organisation happens to have a wonderful D&I persona, that isn't enough.
Yeah.
It should be the norm across the board. Now it's okay to have exemplars that show the way to others, but our job as someone like Computacentre being such a large organisation, our job with our reach, with our resonance, with our weight, with our power, with the impact of things that we do, working with others with a similar level of magnitude in the industry, is the only way we're really going to drive change. So what do I see in the future? I see more initiatives like the ones that we're doing with TCare. I see more organisations leaning forward. It shouldn't always just be, someone needs to drag you in. You need to lean forward as well. You need to raise your own flag and say, I'd like to get involved. Please show me how. Please show me the way. Can I borrow from you? Can I steal with pride? So I'd love to see more organisations leaning forward. And I'd love to see, if we had this conversation in 5 years' time, I'd like to see, from a representation point of view, things have changed tangibly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of background activity happening right now, but if you looked at most people's organisation charts, it doesn't look any different. If you looked at the stats that organisations publish, it doesn't look any different.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's because we are at base camp 1, but in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I'd expect to see those org charts with different faces on them.
Yeah.
I'd expect to see those stats with a different shift in the numbers. So I'm okay with the fact that we're starting now and we're starting with some real urgency, and I can see that urgency across the board. I'm okay with that. But I'd equally like to pick up the pace and make sure some of our changes really are impactful. So anyone who's looking in from the outside can say, I can see different, I can feel different. So now I'm okay with the fact that things look like they're about to change. But we'll get there.
Brilliant.
I've got no doubt we'll get there.
Well, look, we'll hold you to that 5 years' time conversation, right? And hopefully, as a sector, well, we won't get rid of you. I know you're like, Colin, it's fine. You'll be jumping at the door, but I think thinking about that accountability, and legally, let's hope that things have changed that make it better, so we can track actually kind of who works for our organisation and how that has changed over time. But what I really heard from that, Colin, was responsibility. There is a responsibility on us all to lean in, especially when we're at companies that have got that, that larger weight, more employees, that name in the sector to really make change. So when the legalities don't stand there, I think we've got to do it anyway, right? So look, that's brilliant, and thank you so much for your input.
Fantastic. Thank you both again for this wonderful podcast. Pleased to be part of it. And as you rightly say, let's make sure we get this done.
Yeah, and thank you for taking part in being on the podcast as well, Colin. Really do appreciate your insights and your depth of knowledge from your experience within the industry. I think a lot of our listeners have been jotting down quite a few notes, and they've really been able to take a lot of information. So thank you from yourself. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. So if you could please support us by following us on socials. We are on LinkedIn. You've got YouTube where you can consume the podcast, as well as Spotify and other media outlets. Thank you, Jel, as well, for being an amazing host as well, and really getting the information that we need. But for our listeners, thank you for listening, and we really appreciate you being on this journey with us. And until next time, you've been listening to the TK Podcast, and take care.
Cheers all.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. So please continue the dialogue on socials. To stay updated on when we release the next episode, follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter at TC4RE. And don't forget to check our website at www.tcare.org for more information and content on today's topics.